American history is full of grand speeches, epic battles, and heroic legends. But hidden beneath the polished portraits and patriotic parades lies something far more explosive. A century-spanning saga of betrayal, sabotage, jealousy, ego, revenge, broken friendships, and presidential hatred so intense it literally reshaped the nation. If you think modern politics is messy, buckle up, because for the next hour, I'm taking you on a journey through the darkest rivalries inside the White House. Rivalries filled with secret letters, stolen elections, assassination rumors, emotional meltdowns, and petty acts so shocking you'll swear they came from a Netflix drama. This isn't politics. This is war. And it started long before any of us were alive. But don't get too comfortable, because the first feud didn't just break a friendship. It nearly broke America. Chapter 1. The Best Friends Turned Enemies. Adams versus Jefferson. They began as brothers, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the brains behind America's birth certificate. Two men who literally wrote freedom into existence. But nothing tests friendship like power. The year is 1796. America is young, fragile, and on the brink of political puberty. And suddenly, the two founding friends find themselves running against each other for president. Sound awkward? Oh, it gets worse. Back then, whoever came in first became president, and second place became vice president. So guess what happened? Adams won. Jefferson became his VP. It was like electing your best friend as class president, then making your archenemy his assistant. And if you're thinking that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, trust me, you have no idea. The insults begin. Jefferson's ally James Callender called Adams a hideous hermaphroditical character. Basically, you're too ugly to be human. Adams' team fired back, calling Jefferson a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow. Imagine the pettiness of Twitter, but written with a quill pen. The breakup. Jefferson wins the 1800 rematch. Adams is so salty, he sneaks out of the White House at 4 a.m. to avoid seeing him. The first presidential ghosting in history. The twist. But decades later, after years of silence, the two men start writing letters again. And shockingly, they become friends. They forgave each other, reconnected. And then, the most poetic plot twist in American history. They died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Not even Hollywood writes endings that perfect. But if you think that rivalry was dramatic, the next one literally helped create the two-party system and nearly destroyed lives along the way. Chapter 2. The Stolen Presidency. Jackson versus John Quincy Adams. 1824. The election from hell. 4 candidates. No majority. And the final decision lands in the hands of Congress. Jackson won the popular vote. He won the electoral vote, but he didn't hit the magic number. So Congress picks John Quincy Adams. And then Adams immediately names Henry Clay, the guy who handed him the victory, as his Secretary of State. America calls it the corrupt bargain, political blood sport. The 1828 rematch? Pure chaos. Adams's people ripped Jackson apart, calling him violent, illiterate, unstable. They even attacked Jackson's wife, Rachel, accusing her of bigamy. Jackson's side fired back, accusing Adams of running a secret prostitution ring for the Russians. No, seriously. Tragedy strikes. Rachel Jackson dies weeks before inauguration. Jackson blames the attacks. He says at her funeral, "May God forgive her murderers. I never can. This wasn't politics. It was personal." And if you think that's dark, wait until we get to the feud that literally affected the fate of millions after the Civil War. Chapter 3. The Civil War Aftershock. Andrew Johnson versus Ulysses S. Grant. After Lincoln's assassination, America is bleeding, and the country needs unity. Instead, it gets Andrew Johnson versus Ulysses S. Grant. A feud so toxic one refused to even ride to the inauguration with the other. The split. Johnson wanted to go easy on ex-Confederates. Grant wanted justice and protection for freed slaves. Their visions were polar opposites. And when Johnson tried illegally firing Edwin Stanton, Grant refused to be his pawn. Johnson exploded. Grant fired back with devastating calm. By Inauguration Day, Johnson refused to show up. But the next feud? It wasn't political. It was a straight-up heartbreak. Chapter 4. BFFs Turned Bitter Enemies. Roosevelt versus Taft. Teddy Roosevelt loved Taft. He trusted him. He chose him as successor. And Taft broke his heart. Taft drifted right. He fired Roosevelt's people. He reversed Roosevelt's policies. Roosevelt felt betrayed, like finding out your best friend sold your dog. The 1912 meltdown. Roosevelt calls Taft puzzlewit, flubdub, has less brains than a guinea pig. Taft calls Roosevelt a honeyfuggler, someone who lies sweetly. Roosevelt leaves the Republican Party entirely, forms his own party, the Bull Moose Party, just to destroy Taft. He succeeds. Taft wins. Only 2 states. He cries in front of his aides. Friendship destroyed. Party shattered. But the next feud didn't just ruin friendships. It nearly destroyed the economy. Chapter 5. The Silent Hate. Hoover versus FDR. 1932. The Great Depression is suffocating the nation. Hoover is drowning. FDR is rising. Their mutual hate is volcanic. The 4-month standoff. FDR refuses to support Hoover's emergency plans. Hoover calls this the coldest political act ever undertaken. Banks are collapsing, and the 2 men won't even look at each other. The awkward ride. On Inauguration Day, they sit in the car together in icy silence. The photo becomes legendary for how uncomfortable it is. But this isn't the worst presidential breakup. Not even close. Because now we enter the modern era, and things get personal. Chapter 6. The General versus the President. Truman versus Eisenhower. Truman admired Eisenhower, wanted him to run for office. But when Ike failed to defend Truman's mentor George Marshall from McCarthy's smears, Truman unleashed hell. He called Ike inexperienced, petty, cowardly. Ike refused Truman's coffee invitation before inauguration. Truman later wrote, "Ike knows as much about politics as a pig knows about Sunday." But if Truman disliked Ike, he absolutely hated Nixon. Chapter 7. Truman versus Nixon, hate with the heat of 1,000 suns. Truman said, "Nixon is a no-good lying bastard who can lie out of both sides of his mouth." And he meant it. Nixon had built his career destroying opponents with communist smears. Truman saw him as the cancer of politics. Even in retirement, Truman roasted him weekly. But if you think that's ruthless, wait till we talk about the feud that sparked assassination rumors. Chapter 8. Kennedy versus Johnson. Power, envy, and paranoia. They weren't friends. They weren't teammates. They were barely even allies. JFK needed a Southern vote-getter, so he picked LBJ. The hate begins. The Kennedy circle looked down on Johnson. Johnson despised Bobby Kennedy so much he called him a snot-nosed little SOB. The nepotism law. When Johnson became president, he passed an anti-nepotism law. A direct hit at the Kennedy dynasty. Assassination rumors. People whispered conspiracies. But decades of evidence show nothing connects LBJ to the shooting. But Johnson's greatest hatred wasn't for Bobby, but for Richard Nixon. Chapter 9. Johnson versus Nixon. Accusations of treason. 1968. Peace in Vietnam is finally within reach. Then Johnson receives intelligence that Nixon's team is sabotaging negotiations behind his back. Johnson says, "This is treason. Nixon has blood on his hands. He never forgave him." But not all feuds are explosive. Some are quiet, cold, and painfully awkward. Chapter 10. Carter versus Reagan. Awkward transition from hell. Carter loses to Reagan in 1980. Their transition is frostier than a Siberian winter. Reagan doesn't take notes. Carter snaps at him. Nancy Reagan asks to move in early. Carter says no. Then the Iran hostages are released, minutes after Reagan is sworn in. Carter is devastated. But now we reach the grand finale. The feud that defined an era. Obama versus Trump. And trust me, you don't know even half of it. Chapter 11. The franchise feud. Obama versus Trump. It begins in the tabloids. Not politics. Trump pushes the birther conspiracy, claiming Obama wasn't born in the U.S. Obama claps back at the 2011 Correspondents' Dinner and roasts Trump so hard the air temperature rises 3 degrees. Many believe this humiliation fueled Trump's decision to run. The 2016 payback. Trump wins and begins dismantling Obama's legacy. One policy at a time. The insults. Obama breaks tradition to criticize Trump. Trump refuses to invite Obama to the White House portrait ceremony. But the Obama feud leads directly into the Biden feud. Chapter 12. Obama versus Biden, the secret strain. Behind the smiles. The partnership had cracks. Obama warned Biden not to run in 2020. He told aides, "Don't underestimate Joe's ability to mess things up." Biden was hurt. His team even more so. But while some relationships faded quietly, one feud pushed America into a constitutional crisis. Chapter 13. Trump versus Biden, the final break. 2020, the most heated election in modern history. Trump calls Biden sleepy, corrupt, incompetent. Biden calls Trump the worst president ever. Biden wins. Trump refuses to concede. Dozens of lawsuits, election denial, and January 6th, the broken tradition. For the first time in 152 years, the outgoing president doesn't attend his successor's inauguration. Trump leaves Washington at dawn. The aftermath. The feud continues for years, shaping politics, shaping culture, shaping the country. But through all the chaos, hatred, insults, and drama, one truth remains. Presidents may run the nation, but their rivalries often reshape it. So the next time someone tells you politics used to be polite, just remember, behind every famous painting in the White House is a story of someone who hated the man in the painting before him. These weren't just presidents. They were rivals, enemies, human beings fighting for legacy, survival, and history itself. If you want to know what they banned inside the White House, well, that's a whole new chapter. And trust me, you're going to want to see it.